the end, Abby, I'm sorry. As most of you know, we are in the process of searching for a new senior rabbi at B'nai Torah. And as part of this process, the Senior Rabbi Search Committee has invited Rabbi Paul Steinberg and his wife Shira to spend Shabbat with us this weekend. Rabbi Steinberg is the senior rabbi at a congregation called Shofar in Tiburon, California. He is a celebrated author, spiritual leader, educator, and we are very pleased to have him here with us this weekend. You will also have a chance after Kiddush today to attend our Q&A session with Rabbi Steinberg. We are happy to have him here in our bima, and I invite him up to share some words.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So wonderful to celebrate Shabbat with you. And Sloan, great job. We're all so proud of you. You did such a good job. Mazel tov to you and your family. Just want to begin with gratitude. Thank you to all of you for welcoming me and Shira over the course of the past couple of days, to Rabbi Steinhardt and to Rabbi Eppelbaum, Rabbi Sussman, Cantor Fishman, and all the staff. You've made our stay such a joy. We're so happy to be here in Boca with all of you. So one of the things about the Torah is that we learn about many, many leaders, and we're not told specifically why God chooses them. Why does God choose, for example, David, or Moses, or Abraham, or Deborah, or anybody else? But because this weekend, on Monday, we're also celebrating the legacy of a particular leader, Rabbi Steinhardt referenced, Martin Luther King, I'd like to speak about Moses' selection, because we do have a little bit of a biological information about Moses before he is chosen by God. There are 3 incidents in particular. There are 3 things Moses sees when he leaves the palace of Pharaoh. And you could, by the way, contrast this with the story of the Buddha. It's actually very interesting. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, is, according to the myth, a prince shielded by his father from the life outside the palace. And when he finally leaves of his own accord, he sees 3 things. He sees someone sick and suffering, he sees someone old and suffering, and he sees someone dead, which is also a source of suffering. He'd never seen these things before. And as if intuitively, he responded by dedicating his life to minimizing and combating personal suffering through spiritual practice. This is the essence, the spiritual essence of Buddhism. There are 4 Buddhist noble truths, and noble truth number 1 is life is suffering. The 3 subsequent noble truths are about how to put a stop to suffering. Now, contrast that with Moses, who also leaves the palace as a prince of Egypt. And he sees 3 things. First, he sees an Egyptian slave master beating a slave, and Moses puts a stop to that. Later, he sees 2 Israelite slaves quarreling, and he puts a stop to that. Then, after he runs away to Midian, he sees Midianite roughnecks harassing Midianite women, and he puts a stop to that. Moses witnesses 3 things, like the Buddha did, but rather than being about personal suffering, they're about injustice. And what we quickly learn about Moses is that he does not tolerate injustice. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, is the one who stands up to injustice. And each of the incidents are instructive because they each frame a different relationship of injustice. The first is between a non-Jew and a Jew. The second, between 2 Jews. And the third, between 2 non-Jews. In other words, for Moses, injustice, no matter who is involved, is injustice. Or as Dr. King would later put it, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. In other words, Moses cared not only about the injustice inflicted upon by his own people or by his people, but injustice in whatever manifestation. Listen, there are people who only care about when bad things happen to Jews. They only care about issues of Israel and anti-Semitism. And for that, Moses has you covered. But that's not all he covered. There are times when Jews do bad things to other Jews. I'm sure you're shocked by that. But yes, it happens, and it happens more frequently than you might expect. Moses cares about that too. And then there are those whose concern is only within the Jewish community, sort of a more extreme version of the first group, and so it goes. If non-Jews are doing terrible things to other non-Jews, they say, why is this our problem? What does this have to do with the Jewish people? It's not our problem. But Moses' example contradicts that as well. So this is a good Shabbat on which to remember Moses' lesson, which is that the obligation to oppose injustice has absolutely nothing to do with who the perpetrator is or who the victim is. It's a universal obligation, and it is one of the main reasons we indeed refer to Moses as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. And I will risk to suggest that this difference in the biographies between Moses, who focuses on injustice in the world, and the Buddha, who focuses on the suffering of the embodied individual, is the clearest difference between these two spiritual paths. Not that there's not crossover, of course there's crossover. But with regard to the quintessence, the character and defining emphasis of each spiritual path, this is a clear difference. And trust me, if you see a strain of Buddhism that focuses on injustice, I guarantee you that it was a Jew-boo who introduced it. And yet, despite all this, we still don't entirely know why God chose Moses as the greatest leader of the Jewish people. We can guess that it's intolerance of injustice, that it's because he cannot stand to see cruelty, the face of power combined with, Rabbi Steinberg said, indifference that we see again and again and again in every century, including this one and to this very day and moment. But the question I want us to pursue today is why Moses is born with this disdain for injustice. How did that happen? The Torah doesn't really tell us. But I want to propose a theory. Remember that Moses, like every other Israelite baby boy of his time in Egypt, is born under the sign of death. And the only thing that saves him is the desperate act of his mother, who puts him in the basket, and the basket is called a teva. That word, teva, is used only one other time in the Torah. You know when it's used? It's the word used to refer to Noah's Ark. In other words, the Torah is hinting to us that this basket is the one that will save civilization. It will save humanity from destruction, just as Noah's Ark did. It's a teva because it carries within it the spirit alone that will ensure that humans will survive. And then what happens? Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river to bathe, and what does the Torah say about her when she opens the teva? It says, V'hine na'ar bocheh. And behold, the child is crying. And the rabbis say, that's a strange phrase, sort of an anomaly, that she beholds a child crying. We don't say that normally. Normally one hears a child crying. The fact that it says hine, and she beholds a child crying, they say suggests that he was crying silently. And she actually had to look at him to know that he was crying. Why? Because already he was conditioned out of fear as a baby not to cry out loud, because on some level he was aware that if he cried out loud, he could be found, caught, and killed. And this begins Moses' constant struggle that we know throughout his life. He had this struggle to express himself. Remember in chapter 4 of Exodus, it says, Kavad peh, kavad lashon. Moses says to God, I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. I can't talk right. I can't say what it is I really want to say. What is atzur me'amakei halev? What is locked up inside Moses' heart? He can't say it because he's wounded. He's traumatized for being cast out of his home, sent down the river, and raised, even though in a palace, a home that was not his own. But the remarkable thing is that we know when someone suffers some pain in this world, that there's a natural human reaction. What do people usually do when they suffer pain, when they're developmentally traumatized? What do they do? Usually, when someone suffers pain in this world, the natural human reaction is not to be more empathetic, but instead to turn around and inflict that pain on somebody else. The bully is the one who is hit at home and then goes to find someone weaker, whether in person or today online. And online is tragically and terribly so much easier as an outlet for bullies. To find someone weaker with whom to inflict the pain on that he himself feels, to salve his own feelings of inadequacy. But that was not Moses. Moses, like the greatest leaders, like Churchill and Lincoln, for example. Churchill, who was antagonized as a child because he had a lisp, who suffered from various depressive issues, and was basically an alcoholic. And Lincoln, who suffered what the DSM today would identify as major depressive episodes. Lincoln's friends referred to it as his melancholy. Moses, like those great leaders, took that wound, took that pain, and transformed it into compassion. Or as the great psychologist and American philosopher William James put it when he describes sick souls who turn their sensitivity to wrongness into a dedication toward a greater good, into compassion for others. There's a story of a man who went to sleep one night and he had a life-changing dream. He dreamed that he died and went before God. And he stood before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One. And God asked him, "Where are your wounds?" He said, "I don't have any wounds." Then God asked, "Why not? Was there nothing worth fighting for?" Moses comes into this world wounded. And he knows from a very early age that there is something worth fighting for. Some of our greatest leaders are indeed wounded leaders, fighters that won't give up. There was not a leader of the civil rights movement, as well as many participants, who were not in some form or another jailed, beaten, ostracized, wounded. And of course, in the case of Dr. King, murdered, because they knew there was something worth fighting for. Very few of our Jewish ancestors were not wounded. And in every century, Jews have demonstrated that there is something worth fighting for. We are, as you know, the luckiest, richest, safest Jewish community that ever walked on the face of the earth. Despite the uptick in anti-Semitism, we are still the luckiest. We are in this country and at this time privileged beyond imagination, beyond the imagination of those who came before us. But still, we must be wounded. We must still risk and dare. In the end, when each of us stands before God, we must not show ourselves to be too clean, too unmarked, too unwounded. And so that's the question for this Shabbat. Moses knew his struggle. Dr. King knew his struggle. What's yours? On behalf of what cause? On behalf of what moral or spiritual value? What ethic? Or on behalf of what person other than yourself alone will you bear wounds? Who else's trouble will you take into your heart and into your home? On behalf of what purpose will each and every one of us rise up? Because I know, for my own conscience, God knows I have my own personal battle scars, as each and every one of us do, because no one is spared pain and heartbreak in this life. And I know from the history of this country, I know from the fight for the state of Israel, and I know from my people, a small, scrappy Middle Eastern tribe whose namesake Israel literally means those who wrestle with God. And I know from our Torah that my life will not be worthy, that it is no worthy life if there's not something worth me fighting for. Shabbat Shalom. So just similar to where I was at Valley Beth Shalom as the associate rabbi, but the educator, the senior rabbi left, and the congregation asked me to slide into the senior rabbi slot, which I did several years ago, and I'm proud of the work I've done. I'm proud of the community that we have there. It's a lovely place. If you're ever there, you should visit. You've been there. What brings me here? Well, I had noticed that B'nai Torah had been on the list looking for quite a while. And the truth is, my father died in November just before Thanksgiving. And as he was 96, he lived a good life. And as one might do, I began to self-reflect on my own life and where I was in the world. And I looked at B'nai Torah and I thought, I'm in my 50s, and place is a lot like VBS. I read the questionnaire. They check a lot of my boxes. I think I check a lot of theirs. And I could just sort of hear the voice of my father saying, you should really look at this. You don't want to 5 years down the line look back and say that you didn't take a shot at something that could be a real shidduch, a fit, and a growth opportunity for you where your growth is heading anyway. And so I applied. And this is the only place that I've applied.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate that, and I'm glad you decided to take the plunge and apply. It's been a wonder having you here this weekend. So if there are questions, there's a microphone up front. You can just step up. Morley? Is it on?
Let's continue the story. What are your personal objectives, and what do you hope to achieve with this congregation?
Well, this congregation, because it's so much larger than the one I'm at has 525 or so families. Not that that's small. It's considered a medium-sized synagogue in the conservative movement, but it's arranged and structured so differently. There's a much broader staff. There are obviously other rabbis around. You have a phenomenal cantor, as you know. You have a robust educational administration, all sorts of programming, world-class programming. The job, I think, of senior rabbi is very different than the job that I'm doing currently, which is a much smaller staff. In many ways, we're shifting from a DIY kind of synagogue to more professional, but we're not quite there yet. So it's more of an institution building. While I was there, I started a preschool. I actually brought on the first cantor in the synagogue's history to change the musical and prayer offerings that we have. We started a Touch Shabbat since I've become senior rabbi. As you see, we're starting all these things. The vision is in place, but it has not yet sort of fallen in line and streamlined. This place has. You've had Rabbi Steinhardt for over 30 years. Much of his vision has come to fruition. I share. That's another thing, there's sort of a synchronicity. The things that he tries to, and I've met with him and spoken to him about this, what I'm trying to build there is what he has built here. And so the role of senior rabbi is much more of maintaining the bounds of that vision, moving it forward, seeing where other opportunities the vision might expand and sanctify, and at the same time, holding the staff and being a thought leader. That, to me, is where my personal, if you will, and professional ambitions align in one place. That's where my personal spiritual growth goes, and it's also where my professional growth goes. And if if this all works out, I can do that here, and if it doesn't, I will be, seeking to pursue that in the place that I currently am.
So one thing I didn't mention before we started the questions, I appreciate if we keep the questions short and to just questions. We don't necessarily want to hear long narratives. I know sometimes that happens when we get into these kinds of sessions. Not that anybody here would do that, but I've heard sometimes that happens. So, Harvey?
It's notoriously difficult to follow a successful, long-term, in this case 30-year senior rabbi without having the congregants come up and say, oh, he's not Rabbi Steinhardt, right? What might you do in order to overcome that problem?
Well, I wanted to make a joke about our names. At least I got half of the name. I'm on my way.
That was one of the requirements for the job.
It is difficult. There's no question about it. And that is a profoundly important relationship. As I sort of was alluding to, I think one of the first roles is to continue and make sure that his vision and his successes remain successes and remain a part of the congregation to solidify his legacy. And I'll need his help. And frankly, I look at it as a benefit. I mean, he's not moving to Israel. He's not leaving the country or leaving town. He'll be around to help me to navigate the relationships, to advise me, God willing, as a part of this transition, as I slowly but surely make my own imprint, and work toward my own passions, and establish myself amongst the staff and partner with people like Rabbi Applebaum, Rabbi Sussman. I think sometimes God works in these processes of hiring because it's really hard to know. In the end, there's always a risk because you can't know until somebody starts working here. But, I'm a little bit mystical about this in that way. I think in some ways there's been an advantage that the job has been on the market for a while because it has allowed for a settling in and acceptance of the transition. For the congregation to be ready for someone that's new, maybe coming around, and the staff, maybe there's more of a readiness for that. And I view it as a great benefit to have an emeritus who knows this community and will still be a presence. I saw this work at Valley Beth Shalom when Rabbi Harold Schulweis, who you may not have heard of, but is really arguably one of the greatest rabbis of the second half of the 20th century, passed it on, the senior rabbiship, onto Rabbi Ed Feinstein, but still was an emeritus and stuck around and participated. So it can be done. It can be done.
Great, thanks.
Sorry. Hi. Do you believe in a personal God? Do you believe in a personal God? That is a God who, if you're aware of it, actually works in your life? And if so, could you give an example?
I do believe in a personal God. The Jewish tradition, in fact, teaches us that God is both personal and transcendent and beyond. And I do see God working in my life. I mostly only see it in retrospect. It's hard to anticipate where your life is going or where God is directing us. But I try to live my life in such a way where I live in acceptance, and I would call that God's will. In some ways, I see me sitting here today. As I look back at the first moments of me applying, I see God in that. I have to say that the place where I see God most in my life is actually with my wife, who I knew for a long time, and we were friends, and both in previous relationships, and we stayed in touch, we worked together, and at the time I would never have thought of something romantic. Of course, she had a crush on me the entire time. But I would never have thought. And we stayed in touch as sort of colleagues, friends, and then one day something just happened. And I look back at that moment, I'm like, of course we were supposed to be together. Of course we're like b'shert, perfect for each other. Of course it has led to this moment. And it has felt perfect and right all along. So that's one area in which I experience a personal God in my life, in my most intimate and sacred friendship and loving relationship.
It's hard to ask a question or even to get an answer after that question and that answer. More mundane, you described yourself as one of your goals here at B'nai Torah as being a thought leader. I wondered if you have thought about, and you probably certainly have, coming from Silicon Valley, about the role of artificial intelligence in the future of your position as a rabbi and the implications for the congregation, and especially in terms of the education aspect of it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I need to convince it was AI that actually wrote my sermon.
That's what I just said.
To be honest, I don't think I do think about that all that much. AI and the role and what it plays. I'm not coming from Silicon Valley. Maybe that's part of the curveball. I'm coming from the North Bay. The North Bay, and that's the South Bay. We're in the North Bay, which is a different kind of suburban life. It's more about like yoga studios and hiking trails. I think that technology, I think a lot about technology. I think a lot about our kids and the mediated experiences they have behind screens. Oftentimes not just one screen, but two. And their, and the lack of sort of face-to-face human experiences of life. So much of what they do is behind screens, socializing, studying, gaming, and I think we're starting to see tremendous detriments around what it means to be a human being, and I worry about AI's potential future of really becoming an all-consuming element of our society. I don't think about it in terms of replacing educators. There were studies long ago of, say, small children and learning language. The difference between a child just listening on an audio tape to language, a child watching somebody on a screen speaking a language, and a person and a baby learning a language from an actual human being that was there. Within the course of 9 weeks, no language development of the babies that learned through either the audio or the video screen, but almost complete fluency as according to that developmental level if they're in human touch. We are much more complicated than many of us may realize. The amount of information, the cues, facial expressions, energies that we put off. I would never want AI to replace the in-person communal aspect of Jewish education. It's far too precious to be passed down. It is not merely, data, like in the movie The Matrix, you plug it into your head. I know Kung Fu. That's not how it is. It's a social, emotional thing, and learning is something, to be truly educated is something that you care about the material. You care about Torah. You care about the Jewish people. And that care flies from one spark of the self to the other. I believe in that deeply. I don't know if that answers your question, but okay.
That's good. So I like the reference to The Matrix. Are you a movie fan?
I am a movie fan.
Yeah, good. That's great. Rabbi Steinhardt is too, so there's another connection.
Okay.
Michelle.
Well, this is a pretty easy question, I think. So it's personal for me. I wanted to know if you've ever performed same-sex marriages, and if you haven't, would you do it? And how you feel on the subject?
I have not yet had the opportunity to perform a same-sex marriage. I 100% would. How I feel about it, I feel the same way as if if it was two opposite sex. I'm grateful that our movement has made space for this in the past decade or so, couple decades maybe. Yeah.
Jack?
I've got two questions about your Dvar Torah.
Okay.
One, you cited a midrash that shared with us that Moses was conditioned as an infant to not cry out loud. My question there is, what's your understanding of how the author of that midrash came to this kind of hypothesis? And what do you think of this kind of hypothesis? I mean, the author obviously could not have known. He speculated. So that's one question. The second question has to do with follow-up on Moses being so sensitive to oppression that he intervened, and he even intervened with deadly force. It really bothered him. Yet when Moses said to God at the end of the Parsha, since you got me involved intervening with Pharaoh, things have become a lot worse for Bnei Israel. They're more oppressed than ever. And God's reply was not, yes, I understand, that's really terrible. God simply says, stand back, you will see my power by which I will liberate the people. Doesn't sound like a very empathic God. Those are my two questions.
Yeah, so great questions. Really great, insightful on the Torah portion and even going into the next Torah portion. On the first one, so there's a midrash that says, why is it that it says, Hine, behold? And that midrash says that she saw him crying rather than heard him crying. Off of that, I kind of spun that into the whole thing. She had to see him, he was crying silently. And that was me, a little bit of my midrash on that was my theory as to why she had to see him, that he was crying silently. And had been conditioned as a baby to be quiet when crying. And that led to a further trauma of being a person in the world who was unable to speak his mind, speak his heart, okay? Now, when Moses says, what did you get me into this for? It's only worse. It's kind of funny. That's the end of the Parsha, curtains close. And it starts the next Parsha, and God says, see what I will do to Pharaoh. It'll be, in some ways, it is kind of, if I were to critique God, and that's one of the beautiful things about Judaism, we get to question and critique and be angry with God and to wonder and to continue the conversation. See my power, as you put it. So on one hand, God is saying, this is going to be a demonstration of my own power. The worse it is, the bigger the miracle for me. I'm going to get a good reputation out of that, if you just to expand the metaphor. But then God says to Moses, say therefore to the Jewish people, and God gives the 4 verbs of redemption, where we get the Seder, 4 cups. Actually, there's a 5th, which is why you have a cup of Elijah. And these are the things that I'm going to do, and you need to tell this to the people. And so in a way, God is also, that hard-crushing bondage is also a setup for Moses and his leadership. It's a way for him to redeem his own leadership and call him to a greater cause. Now Moses is in conversation with God. Now Moses has skin in the game. Now Moses is a part of it. So it's not just about the hardship of the people, it is further, in a way, increasing Moses' leadership capacity and his motivation to be maybe the leader that he needs to be. Now that's a sad thing for the Jewish people, but in a way, maybe that's what was needed for Moses to be the redeemer that he ultimately was. On one foot, that's my best take.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Eileen Mackler, and I'm a new member of the synagogue. So welcome to you, welcome to me.
Welcome to you, Eileen.
And my daughter went to University of Arizona in Tucson.
We're friends already.
There you go. And she went all through Schechter from...
Did you went through Schechter?
Yeah, in Baltimore, she went to Schechter.
Oh, and the Krieger Schechter in Baltimore.
Krieger Schechter, that's exactly right. You've been. Okay. I don't know how you've worked as a rabbi. I think it's important for the children, whether it's in a Schechter school or a Hebrew school, to know the rabbi. For him to show up in a class once in a while, to talk to the kids. I never had that. Growing up, I didn't talk to a rabbi. I mean, I was scared to death of him. Besides Good Shabbos or Good Yontif, didn't talk to him until we were getting married. And then I was scared to death to give my opinion. The next rabbi that we had, my youngest I had at 36. When she was bat mitzvah, that was the only time I spoke to the other rabbi, like to go in his office and give my opinion. I'm not afraid of rabbis anymore. But I think it would have been important to my growing up, and then my daughter who went to Schechter growing up, to have had a non-scary opportunity to be with a rabbi, to see a rabbi in their classroom, and talk to him as a rabbi, but also a person who cares.
I agree.
Ta-da!
I agree. I can only tell you, I hope I'm not scary. I like to think that I am extremely accessible, if maybe to a fault. And I take pride, and I've learned the hard way that I need to be me. I need to be authentic. I began really my career as a rabbi of children and teaching children, always in classrooms, in Hebrew schools. Preschool, I taught preschool. It's the hardest teaching you'll ever do, by the way. They interrupt you.
What do you mean?
And I love being amongst kids and speaking to their developmental level. I'd like to think that I have refined how to do that with certain questions that they ask. I love partnering with educators. Educators are my favorite people. They're really like God's right-hand men and women in the world. And I've already spoken to Kathy, the director of the Hebrew school program here, and to Naomi, and to the folks that are working down there. And I would love the opportunity to partner with them, and I'd be at their beck and call for sure. Because in my opinion, I have yet to be convinced that there is anything more important in the world than the moral development of children.
Agreed.
And if I can play a part in a positive way in that regard, I'm all in.
And I realize that the children's Hebrew school, it's not during the day. It could be at a difficult time for a rabbi or anybody. But even if the kids were having a program, for you to lead a program instead of one of the teachers, just so they are familiar with the rabbi and don't have to wait till they're getting married to have a conversation.
Happy to do it. Good
Thank you.
suggestions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. For the benefit of the new congregant, our rabbis have always been in the classrooms, and our children have grown up here, and I have 3 of them, and they are always. And so I would hope and think that, especially with Rabbi Steinhardt, guiding and leading, that you would be doing that as well. So I appreciate that comment and that question. I'm a spokesperson here, so this question is not my own, but it comes from one of the congregants. Our community is not immune to the struggles of teenagers and youth and their struggles in this world and with addiction and things like that. And we are wondering if you have, in your congregation, started any kind of program or anything to help with that type of issue in young people, and if you would be willing to do that here.
Great question. With regard to addiction and young people, the greatest source of addiction, this may sound controversial, is social media. It is built on an addiction model. And I'm very critical of the social media. They knew this when they were building it, because our brains are wired in such a way that whenever something contributes to our survival, we get a hit of dopamine, which is a bit of pleasure, right? And that happens with sort of fattening food or lots of carbohydrates, because that helps our survival. Because if you're in a famine, better eat those kinds of food. If you had a cartload of asparagus, that's not going to help you get through a famine. And the same is true of learning new information. Learning, actually, you get a little bit of pleasure principle. We love learning. Humans love learning. So these social media are built in this way to ping you. You've got mail, text message, a like, whatever it is, something, an update, and it's constantly at them all the time. And it's dopamine, 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 until what happens is your dopamine, the receptors downregulate, and you need more and more and more of it just to feel normal. And a lot of people, not just kids, are addicted. Of course, there's other forms of addiction. There are substances, other process addictions, gambling, things on the internet, even things like power, prestige, can be. I have worked in teen prevention. There are curricula for this kind of thing. I have developed those curricula. I have, in my congregation, I also think it's easy to talk about teens, by the way, because it's them, but really it's adults too. And all of us are 1 degree, if not directly affected by somebody who has some kind of addiction. And now sugar addiction is a big thing. In my congregation, I developed a service for this with particular music and particular prayers. I've written prayers, and I did a study group. It was called Serenity Marin, and it was between different congregations. I got the Reformed congregation to work on it. I didn't want to make it about membership. It was just a service to the community, and found funders to fund the service, which included a free dinner, and got people involved to share some of their stories. As well, I did the study for years through COVID, and then when I became senior rabbi, it was really hard to maintain that, because it was really all on me. So I would be willing to be of service in that way. Given my priorities and time, if allowed, I'd be willing to partner with people on these kinds of things. I know there's a lot of recovery locally here in Boca and in this part of Florida, and if I can contribute positively in that way, of course I'd be willing to share everything that I've done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for doing this session. I think it's quite challenging. I have a question, a general question. How do you think rabbis should deal with criticism of Israel?
How do I think rabbis should deal with criticisms of Israel? Of course, everybody is allowed to criticize Israel. We're allowed to criticize America. I'm a proud American. I consider myself a patriot. My father grew up in Brazil, in Rio. I don't know if you've ever been. It's a different kind of, there was terrible crime there. If you go there, there's these places, these towns are called favelas. They fill up, there's like millions of people, poor people. My father came back to this country and he wouldn't trade it for the world. This was the best thing that ever happened to him, was coming to America and building his family here. Doesn't mean he didn't criticize it. Certainly we're entitled to do that. I don't think a rabbi has a right to tell people not to criticize Israel. I personally don't weigh in on Israeli politics. I'm not an Israeli. I have my opinions, but I'm no expert. I don't live under the policies of Israel. I don't totally know, to be honest. I know in theory that this party, Otzma Yehudit, Jewish Power, represents this under Ben Gvir. I kind of have an idea what Likud is, but I don't really know how this works on a local level and local mayors, etc. So I stay out. I have my opinions and criticisms. When it comes to Zionism and the Zionist story, which led to the establishment of the State of Israel, I feel rabbis need to not only defend that story, but should be teaching their communities that story as it's our own story, and to help to provide content knowledge and facts in a world of misinformation and propaganda, so that our community feels proud and well defended in such a world of misinformation and anti-Semitism. And the 3 Ds of anti-Semitism, which is demonization, delegitimization of the State of Israel, and double standards that you wouldn't hold for anywhere else. And I have been an outspoken, ardent, staunch speaker in the Bay Area community around this particular issue. Again, you can criticize Israel, but the Zionist story and the legitimacy of its state and the need for a Jewish state has a history. The Holocaust wasn't the beginning, it was the end of something that had been going on a long time. I don't know if that answered your question.
Right. Amen to that.
And who are you?
Only since I know you got a good schluff last night, I have a question for you. For the folks I haven't met, my name is Shira, and I'm married to Rabbi Paul Steinberg, and thank you for welcoming us so warmly. And the question that came to my mind and heart to ask you is... Say it again? Is the congregation that you're in now, there is a beautiful sense of family, and you speak about that in your teaching, and that a synagogue community is a sort of family. And so I am wondering, with the distinction of size, because this is a bigger, beautiful community, and there's a particular beauty to each configuration, and you've been able to develop these personal relationships, and people feel that you know them and that they're cared for, and you said there's a sense of access to you. How do you think, or do you think that that's translatable in a bigger, with bigger numbers?
Okay, Shira.
She put you on the spot with that one.
I do speak about family, and one of the reasons that I do is because I think one of the great tragedies of this particular period that we're in, one of the great epidemics, and this totally contributes to the whole addiction issue and social media and beyond, which is that there is an epidemic of loneliness. There's more people, we're around more people all the time, and yet people feel lonelier than ever. It says in our tradition that we're supposed to welcome the stranger, because it's not easy being a stranger in the world. Well, you know, it used to be that the city that you were born in was the city that you lived in. Not only the city, the house you were born in was the house that you lived in and the house that you died in. And if a stranger came to town, that was a big deal. The whole town is shaken up. By the way, this is the plot of every Western Clint Eastwood movie. Stranger comes to town, everybody is shaken up. Who is this stranger? It's the Music Man, if you know the music. It's the same thing. It's the plot of The Stranger. And with geographic mobility and diversity, people move. They don't live anymore where they grew up. They don't live near their families. I haven't lived near my parents in over 30 years. In a way, we're all strangers. And what we're seeking for is a family. And the synagogue can be that. It is a family. The Jewish people are a family. It is that we are a family of families. And, you know, that's a beautiful thing. That means that we share, we can argue with each other. At my family, at Shabbos table, you know, we all argue with each other. But we sit together and we love each other and we have each other's backs. Right? You don't have to have conformity of thought to be in a family and to love each other. There's a safety to that. You know, you want to come to, it's like Cheers, where everybody knows your name, right? That's what we all want. And that's my vision of the synagogue, my Shabbos table, my family Shabbos table. Now, the challenge is, I wouldn't necessarily think it's any different in a larger congregation than a smaller. In my current place, it always prided itself on being Hamish. It's Hamish, it's Hamish. And then I would hear things like, yeah, but it's not so warm and welcoming. You know who it was Hamish for? The regulars who were always there. For them and their friends. It was super Hamish for them. They loved it. But when you came in, it felt like, well, this isn't my family. It's their family. Right? It's a clique. And there's cliques within cliques. That's the same thing. That's the same challenge. And this is Rabbi Steinhardt's vision. It's really his vision too, which is why this is so, you know, sort of synchronistic and fortuitous for me, is that he has the same concept. He wants everybody to feel warm and welcome. He wants it to be a family. Well, the challenge is just a little bit, the puzzle is just a little bit bigger in a larger congregation, but it's the same challenge, which is to make sure that the family expands its concept of family as the time goes on. You know, my niece got married to a guy who I'm not sure about. How could I make him a part of the family? Somebody who's not Jewish, how do I make him a part of the family? They don't seem like they normally would join this kind of synagogue. Well, they're part of the family. And we have to pay attention. We have to find those people. Don't let them get lost. Welcome them. Shake their hand. People just want to be seen and loved. That's all they want. They want to feel a part of. It's in our DNA. So I always, in my congregation, not saying that I would do this here, you know, and I wouldn't change anything, but just to tell you like how I approach this. First of all, I had to tell the ushers. I had to talk to the ushers about this. You see people, you know, don't make them feel like they have to follow the rules is the first thing. Kids can scream in my congregation. That's the sound of life. Am I going to deny life? Be a part of it. Be a part of it. They don't normally scream. People, parents, you know, they know when it's appropriate or not. But I'm not shushing babies in my congregation. And every Shabbos, I have everybody stand up, turn to the people around them, and I say, we're celebrating Shabbat, we're reading the Torah, we're singing prayers together, and we are celebrating being together in this community. We're celebrating community Introduce yourself. Get to know people. Nobody leaves here without meeting somebody new. That's our responsibility. The synagogue is not called a Beit Tfilah, a house of prayer. It's not called a Beit Torah, a Beit Midrash, a house of Torah, a house of study. It's called a Beit, you know what it's called? Beit Knesset, which means a house of gathering together, which, by the way, translated into Greek, is synagogue. That's what we're here to do. Torah, Tfilah, Hebrew, the music, that's the language. That's our values. That's what brings us together. That's the web. That's why we exist. But really, we make it happen together. A family of families. That's the vision. But you can't be complacent. You can't sleep on family. Families don't usually let you. You got to be awake. The family's going to expand. There's going to be new people. Love them. Welcome the stranger. Repeated 39 times in the Torah. Okay, you got me going.
Rabbi, pleasure. You did a great job in not being a stranger. We know so much about you already. And I've been hearing you out. You talked about placing your priorities, your being yourself, being me. You're talking about building partnerships with the other rabbis and so on and so forth. And to be fair to you, we know now about you, and to understand my question, which is a three-part question, I'll tell you a little bit about me. And I'm a new congregant here as well. So I came to this synagogue, to this place where I feel an immense amount of love. I've been blessed to find Rabbi Steinberg, a person of the utmost humble and devoid of ego person. He strives on every service to give credit to everyone and everything, especially to God, and a true credit to the service here and promoting the unity and the community and this feeling of family. And the other rabbis also, Applebaum, which was the one that converted me. See, the way I met Rabbi Applebaum was me and my wife, we've been in the process of converting for 25, 30 year plus, until we finally found somebody that was imbued with knowledge and wisdom, and we felt this connection, and we felt that he was the right leader for us at that time. We met him in another congregation, and we followed.
Can we get to the question?
Sure, but I'm giving him a little background of where I'm at. So I'll be there, Ed, I'll be there. So we followed him here, and then we found Rabbi Steinberg, which, like I said, amazing. And he's been not only working with everyone and creating everyone, but he gives everybody space. We have Rabbi Sussman, which he's got the youth and energy and all that. And it's funny because now we have an elder rabbi, which is Applebaum. You're in the middle, and then Sussman, which is right on the far end. So we have all age groups here to address. And that's part of question one. Being so, are you going to work as a team to address this spectrum of ages from the youth of Rabbi Sussman to the mature experience of Applebaum, and right on the middle where you're at, are you going to be that quarterback working with these rabbis? That's question number one.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a common practice in the rabbinate to look at the different demographics and areas of the congregation that need, more attention. There are challenging areas of the demographics of the congregation. Typically, it's after kids finish B'nai Mitzvah, as I mentioned in my own story. Sometimes it's young singles, and sometimes it's empty nesters. Sometimes these areas have trouble connecting to the synagogue because they connected in one way at one point and now it's a whole different way. And rabbis do work as a team. Of course, I look forward to working with Rabbi Applebaum and Rabbi Sussman, and they have their portfolios. And, you know, I think the important part is that as a team, we recognize each of our own strengths and weaknesses and reflect on where we could do better and maybe where we're best positioned. And sometimes it's the senior rabbi who needs to step into a particular demographic, sometimes it's not. And, you know, we want to all, I'm sure, all of them want to feel like they're a rabbi to everyone. Of course, you can't be to everyone at all times, so you have areas of emphasis or focus, but that's typically how it works, and of course, we're attentive. I can't imagine, I mean, everywhere. It's a big part of the job.
Right. No, what I really meant was, are you going to encourage them to each pursue their own pursuits and embellish them to develop different areas and in different ways, and sort of like develop the whole thing as a whole and then mesh it together?
It's a good question. I appreciate it. I have no idea. First, I would want to come in and learn what's happening. I don't even know how they work in that regard at this time. And of course, I'd want to consult Rabbi Steinhardt about his experience as to where he's found, where he's run into dead ends or blind alleys, and where he's found success, and see what works. But the one thing for sure is that I'm a person that would be willing to try different things, throw it against the wall, keep, you know, assessing how we can improve, and be willing to take risks for the sake of the congregation in positive ways.
Now, before I got the mic, I kind of threw a thing at your wife about spousal compensation. By the way, as a new congregant part of the community, I had fully approved that, so you can empower and embellish your wife to develop programs to be more inclusive to the females and you know, the ladies, and that might be a good idea to take it somewhere into consideration. But I would love to see more of inclusion of the, you know, programs for females, especially my wife loves to be participate in all these things.
Great. Thank you. We got another question.
Second question.
No, why don't you wait? We've got somebody behind you.
Oh, sorry.
One question.
Saw the rear view mirror.
Thanks.
Thank you. Rabbi, you mentioned the importance of the role of spirituality in your life and the importance of God in your life. How would you bring that conversation into the synagogue and open it up in a more open way?
It's a good question. Did everybody hear the question, by the way?
No. Yes.
So how would you, in terms of my own spirituality or spirituality in general, how do you bring that more into an open conversation in the congregation?
So before you go ahead, I'm not sure if this is where you're going, Sue, but, or I'm not even sure you were aware that this morning we had a renewal service in the building the same time as we had our service here. We have that twice a month. Rabbi Amy Pesa leads that. And Sue is a participant in that program. So I think it's tied to that. And you mentioned your training or background with a renewal rabbi. So
I didn't get trained. I didn't get trained. My parents. I attended a few services.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry. You were exposed to it.
If I hear your question correctly, let me backtrack for a second on spirituality. I think sometimes people, when they say the word spirituality, what they picture, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what they picture is sort of like, you know, someone sitting in the lotus position in Zen, like in the forest or on the beach or something. No, not what you're referring to. Well, I do think people think that. They sort of associate it in that way. I guess for me, even if you didn't mean that, I'm on this track anyway, so I'll just go forward, which is that there are many different kinds of spiritualities. It's a personal expression in which one connects the deepest sense of purpose and their soul's yearning to where they feel connected most with the divine. Now, for some people, that is the traditional service. as we experienced it here this morning. For some people, that is the study of Torah. Louis Ginsburg famously said, Rabbi Louis Ginsburg, you know, when I pray, I talk to God. When I study, God talks to me. That's a form of spirituality. For some people, spirituality is the sort of prophetic voice in the world. I know you have a TLC program with Summer, and being out in the world among the people in the streets, doing things for you, that is the most spiritual thing you can do. And sometimes spirituality is in music, and the renewal service offers alternative forms of traditional prayers through music, through meditation. Sometimes spirituality, I don't like the idea of being alone in nature or something like that, but it is what we might call spiritual solitude. That can be a spiritual. So for me, as I hear your question, what rings for me are the sort of resonances of self-expression on where I am on the spiritual spectrum today. I think that a congregation of this size, and with the offerings that it has, should, of course, and I think it does, as you just expressed, as a renewal service, should be looking for offerings for people to be able to engage that, deepen it, discover it, and express it. Synagogues are one of the only places in the world that you can go to where you are empowered to self-express and share what it is that you know with the people around you. To have an input, to have a voice. Look at this young girl today. She got up and gave a Devar Torah. She sang in front of, that's a form of self-expression. I'm sorry that school doesn't give her. Where she took ownership of something. It's a spiritual experience. For me, the best way that I can do that is to simply share my own experience, the things that move me. Whether it's in a Devar Torah, today was about, you know, my woundedness, leaders' woundedness, all of our woundedness, and how that, reckoning with that, facing it, accepting it, forgiving myself for it and others, and transforming it into something in which I can identify in others and help to heal others. That's a spiritual pursuit of mine. That's part of my tikkun. Sharing that piece, sharing the theories and ideas and practices that this tradition has so wisely transmitted and developed and taught from generation to generation that move me. Those are the kinds of things that I can do that might help to inspire yet further expressions and experiences of spirituality wherever you may fall in that spiritual spectrum.
The wrap-up question, I think. We have all been judging you, and you're on the hot seat this weekend. Can you give us some impressions that you'll be going back to Tiburon with? What has impressed you? What blew you away? What didn't you like? How do you think you can see improvements?
You didn't tell me that they were judging me. Judging me?
She let the secret out.
Well, first of all, one of the things that struck me right after that, first day, Thursday, I met all the staff, had meetings with every single staff person, and they all said the same thing, which is a topic that has come up over and over in this session, which is that this is a family, we love each other, we have each other's back, we all are real with each other. And I have to say, as somebody who's on the inside and know how the sausage is made, that's a big deal. Because being an employee in a synagogue can be strenuous. You get a lot of curveballs. You end up doing stuff that you didn't think you signed up for. Everybody wears multiple hats. I don't care how big your synagogue is. People have multiple job titles and descriptions because you have to be able to be flexible. And, to know that staff people feel supported in that, to feel that they can go to other staff people, not just as colleagues, but as friends, that's a really positive sign. And what I try to build where I am, and like to think that I do, in our own way. The robustness of the programming is definitely, but I knew that coming in. I think to hear from Rabbi Steinhardt the sort of areas that he really feels passionate about, you know, the TLC, he's been involved in interfaith, and there's a couple others that he mentioned to me that he feels profoundly proud of. I loved Friday night services. I mean, you know, your cantor is really just quite a, you know, just her embodies like she's lightning in a bottle, you know? And I got to watch her all morning, and she's just into it all morning, smiling as she sings. Those are things that blew me away. I've been touched that the other rabbis have been so kind to me and embraced me. Didn't have to be that way. And I got to say, the chair of the search committee, Steve Garber, is just has done a Herculean job and has done everything possible to make me feel comfortable and to encourage me to be myself, my true self and my best self, and along with Ellen Safran, who got sick, unfortunately, and couldn't be here today, but she too just has been such a joy. I hope that's enough. Those are the main things that I think I'll take back with me.
Great. I assume there were no negatives, or or you'll share those with Cheryl on the way home. Sure, Cantor.
Shabbat Shalom, I enjoyed it very much. On Friday morning, and I learned a lot about the tzitzit, the details, things that I didn't know all of it. So thank you. I learned something new, and I enjoy your sermon today. You spoke about spiritual feelings. I want to go to the spiritual feelings through music. This is my, I came from traditional music. I'm a emeritus cantor from New York. I'm here 4 years as a member. I like what's happening here about music. And the most important, the traditional music, to keep the traditional music go on. So my question, because there is so dramatic changing in our music all over the world, and the changes, something is not about just music, Broadway, opera, pop, etc., and we're losing, and that congregation coming from traditional background, and they like the traditional music. What is your opinion about to keep the traditional music going on? And a difficult question, you know, one of the dramatic changes in the services was that we're losing Shachris or Musaf or Kedusha. We're not doing the repetition, and that repetition, if you look at the Siddur, there is so many tefillot with Jewish music, etc. What is your opinion? What is your feeling?
Yeah, first of all, music to me is profoundly important. There's something that music adds that is immeasurable. My favorite quote about music is a Bob Marley quote. I'm a Bob Marley fan. And one good thing about music is when it hits, you feel no pain. And that is something that music can do for us, and I think music being a part of the congregation is profoundly important. I think, I don't know that I have a comforting answer for you All I can do is be honest, which is that I also have a father-in-law who's a traditional cantor, who one of his favorite topics, he has a lot of favorite topics, and he's just a neshama from sweetest, most wonderful person. And he has his laments about the Jewish community and the generational shifts that he's seen. And his main thing is the loss of traditional chazanut. That he's one of the last of a generation that can do chazanut, that look at a prayer and bring the music in the moment that's needed. I mean, it's beyond, it's not even a skill, it's an art that you're trained in, but then you turn into magic. Like, there just aren't people that do that anymore, and he laments that. And what's interesting is that what is traditional music in one generation began at some point as new music and a change for the previous generation. So you'd think, you know, the tune Shema Yisrael, you'd think that came from Mount Sinai. It was written like in the 19th century in Germany. That is not an ancient, the hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. That was written in the 1980s and 70s in Los Angeles, California by Rabbi Moshe Rothblum. It's traditional. It's the way we've always done it, but it wasn't. And so what happens is that music needs to hold something that is both timeless, traditional, the traditional essence, but also something that's timely, that speaks to the needs of the hour and the generation that is going to ultimately take the baton of this beautiful, sacred tree of life and pass it to the next generation. And that's the tension. That's the tension, how to introduce new things that need to also have old things. Right? The Kabbalists say that the Torah is milin atikin chadishin. It is new old words. And we have a new old religion. It is both new. You know, chadesh yameinu kekedem. We put the Torah away. Renew us to days of old. Well, kedem also doesn't just mean old, it also means kadima, to move forward. Renew us to days moving forward. It's old and new at the same time. And that's the same thing with music. Personally, I think it's really important for children to learn traditional melodies. Because when you learn the traditional melodies and the traditional davening, and then you hear the new thing, and you hear the music, you hear the renewal stuff, you go, oh my gosh, I get the creativity. That's so cool. That's amazing. And I only appreciate it because I knew what it was in the original. That's an educational question. That's an educational question. But no way on earth I would want to stop the production and publication and writing and composition of new Jewish music. It is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And America has been one of the great flourishing beds of this in the past century.
Joe?
Lastly, not to belabor this, I just want to encourage what you just said because I was so struck by it. My children are not observant. They've married out of their religion and all, but they can recite the first stanza of the Shema because it's in a song form, and they can do the first opening stanza as well as the last stanza of the Aleinu because they had been here and it so became ingrained. So on a moment's notice, they can recite that out of the outside. So that's how it got to them, and it is maintained in our families. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Anybody else have a question? We're going to get ready to wrap this up then.
It's short. The three, you're going to love
Sure.
the third part. Second part is, you mentioned different studies and you referenced different things. I love that. Are you going to encourage some opening of Kabbalah studies?
From what I understand, you just had one of the great Zohar scholars in the world, maybe one of the greatest, Danny Matt, here, what was that, last week?
Yes, last week.
By the way, he's local to me in the Bay Area, GTU. He was my teacher's teacher, so, I mean, you just had one of the greatest. I personally my own theology is very much informed by Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. I've written about it in one of my books, and I don't know that I would be a rabbi, frankly, if that sort of mystical stream didn't touch me and inform my conception of God and also the human soul and psyche. And so I do talk about that. I love to teach Kabbalah, probably very different than Dr. Matt, but I love to engage in that study, and of course I would encourage it. Kabbalah was, by the
awesome.
way, normative Judaism until the end of the 17th century, until there was a trauma in Jewish history. For a class, we'll talk about it.
Well, since I am probably the last on the mic today, and before it's stripped away, I would like to thank you in the name of everybody here. It's like been a delight to hear you. And the last question is really about how you feel when you got here. Because when I got here, I feel all this love. I feel all this family. I feel all this connection. And the third question is leading to whatever it is that you feel towards us, how you feel when you came and met us, how you feel now, and how you feel about the place. So how you see yourself and how you feel. That's the third question. Thank you very much for the opportunity of getting to know you.
First of all, I'm glad that you feel so much love. That's a beautiful thing. That warms my heart. How do I feel? I think I talked about it already. I'm very grateful for the warm welcome and all the opportunities to engage with such a wide variety of people. It is an intense process to go through, and I have a feeling that I haven't completely absorbed and processed it all. And I'll be reflecting on that question for sure over the next few days. But so far, so good. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Rabbi. Grateful for taking the time for this question and answer session. Really get to know you on so many levels that we haven't had the chance prior to today, so thank you. And go and get some rest before you pick up again.